You bless the years as they roll on by, and the days are a sign of what you're thinking. We want eternity, and you give us time, and our own lives seem to pass while we're blinking. Oh God of mysteries beyond our thinking, oh God of mysteries gone far beyond our thinking. We ask for light, you give us night and day to help us truly find our own way. We want you only, yet you keep us apart, so that we may mend our own broken hearts. Oh God of mystery beyond our thinking, oh God of mysteries far, far beyond our thinking. We live through life and we wonder if you'll be there when it's all ended. You keep your silence, but you give us a sign to let us know we are always befriended. Oh God of mysteries beyond our thinking, oh God of mysteries gone, gone beyond our thinking. Happy is the one who comes to you. Happy is the one, happy are the two. And we dwell in your house, and we eat at your table, and we say the prayers as our hearts are able. Oh God of mystery beyond our thinking, oh God of mystery gone, gone, gone beyond our thinking. bless the years as they roll on by, and the days are a sign of what you're thinking. We want eternity, and you give us time, and our own lives seem to pass while we're blinking. Oh God of mysteries beyond our thinking, oh God of mysteries gone far beyond our thinking. We ask for light, you give us night and day to help.
Well, that was Bless the Years, Jason's new musical teaching, out on all music streaming platforms, and there's even a music video on YouTube. Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a wonderful summer. On behalf of the Foundation for Non-Duality, we welcome you to our 8th Non-Dual Roundtable discussion, where we, a panel of Jason Schulman's senior students and teachers, discuss the interface between non-duality and our daily lives. We're excited to be here with you. As you may or may not know, the Foundation for Non-Duality is dedicated to making the principles of non-dual thinking and practice, as articulated by Jason Schulman, available to the greater public for the purpose of transforming the consciousness of individuals in order to help alleviate suffering in the world. These principles and their practical application focus on the unitive connection between personal and transcendent consciousness as the foundational basis for change and healing. Jason Schulman sees the study of non-duality, especially in its practical applications in everyday living, as part of the healing of the human soul. The aim is to live our lives as both healing and healthy individuals who are aware of and connected to the entire web of being, including the totality of who we are. Living the totality of our being means including all of our human parts in our awareness, from our great courage and longing to connect to our many imperfections that work against these aims. Jason's teachings are based on kindness towards self and other, and the work of the Foundation is to actualize this kindness in everyday life. If you don't know Jason Schulman, over the past 40 years of teaching, he's worked to reconcile the deistic or relative paths of liberation with the consciousness of Buddhism and other non-theistic paths, to create a truly non-dual path of healing, one that does not exclude any aspect of reality. His work emphasizes the healing of the personal ego and its rightful place in any path that seeks liberation from ignorance and the awakening of compassion. It also seeks to bring the human world, with its imperfections, into alignment and the realization of transcendent awareness. In this way, we develop a conscious awakening to the sacredness of every sentient being and every time-bound moment. And before we dive into the conversation, why don't we do a little meditation? So I'm going to guide us through a short meditation, just a couple minutes. And while we settle in, just take a moment to notice your breath. So make yourself comfortable and put your feet flat on the floor if you can. You don't need to be sitting perfectly erect. You can be leaning. And your breathing, just as it is what's keeping you alive, and that's sufficient. You don't need to change it at all. So just be with your breathing for a moment. So your intention in this meditation is to invite everything in. Begin with the sounds that are around you right now. Maybe you hear the sounds of other people talking in the background. Maybe a car horn or siren. Maybe the wind or a bird. Invite all of those sounds in. We want them to be with you. We want them to be here. Now, invite all of the parts of yourself to be with you right now. The small, frightened parts, the courageous parts, the lazy parts, the devoted parts. Actually say to yourself in your mind, you, the one who forgets to be kind to yourself, be here with me. Come in. You, the selfish one, be here. You, the one who is argumentative, be here. You, the one who remembers God from time to time, be here too. And you, the one who forgets God from time to time, be here as well. Invite all of the parts of yourself and all the parts of your environment to be present right now in this moment. Whatever comes into your heart or mind, whether it's a difficulty or whether it's a great insight, it doesn't matter. They are all treated equally. Invite them in. Let's be with all of this for a few moments. We can start to gently bring ourselves back to the room, back to ordinary awareness. And we're back. So today is an opportunity to have a conversation about our spiritual lives. And what we want to do here today is actually invite conversation. So there's going to be time for audience interaction, and we'd love for you to participate with questions and comments. And this conversation that we're having today is titled, Awakening from the Trance. I'm joined by Andrew Resnick and Henrik Nordmark. My name's Tim Rothschild. I'll be moderating today's conversation. And so let me open it up to the group now. I'm curious, awakening from the trance. What is the trance? What are we talking about here? And what could awakening from the trance look like? Pick it up anywhere.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question because I think there's this common sense understanding of trance of like, I know, I do some shamanic drumming and I go into trance, or I go to like, I know, some five rhythms dance or something, and all these things kind of induce a little trance, or people might have like some psychedelic experience and they think of trance in that way. But I think more importantly still is, I think in our everyday lives, we go into trance all the time without even realizing it. We, watch CNN and we're entranced by the news, and we're kind of just like buying into all these narratives and not even really questioning what's going on. And sometimes we just need to do something to like snap out of it a little bit.
Yeah, to add on to that, there are many different flavors, I think, that trance comes in. Maybe a basic way of, at least I think about it, is seeing things not the way that they are. Maybe believing things that aren't necessarily true in the moment. And a lot of that can be a product of, maybe strong emotions that arise in the present. It could be a product of a lot of our past, that we carry with us, and certain lenses that might color the way that we see and perceive the present moment. And so we're kind of, I think, carrying around, I like to think of them as these lenses that kind of are constantly switching on and off, and are these different senses of a trance when we kind of really buy into what a particular lens might be telling us in any given moment.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I especially think like any historical trauma that we might have had can really influence color how we see things, perceive things. The woman down the street is wearing a red dress, and that red dress reminds me of a mean teacher that I had when I was 5 years old, and who yelled at me. And in psychology, they'll say, okay, that's transference, but effectively, I'm not actually seeing reality as it is. I'm as you said, Andrew, you have this lens, and you might not even be aware of the lens being there.
Yeah, and even to continue with that, even you, as you say, we don't get to really see reality as it is. It makes me wonder, like, do we ever actually get to see reality as it is? It's always, it's pretty, we have these subjective ideas of what it is, but it can also set up this kind of unachievable goal of, I'm in quote, I'm not seeing things the way they are, but there's a much better way of seeing them. How do I get there and not here? Right. And that's a great way to divide oneself again, against what is.
Yeah.
Tim,
like
does that kind
trances,
of?
Yeah, no, it's great. It's like trances within trances, right? It's like, we could, to try to get out of one trance, we go into another one. It seems, I love the idea of transference, first of all, right? And being entranced by these sorts of things. So it's like, what do we do about this? So does coming out of the trance, yeah, how do you do something like that? And why would we want to do that?
I mean, I showed up today to find out. So if you have any tips.
Well, I guess one obvious thing is, having a therapist, engaging in what Jason would call Yetziradic work, working with one's own psychology, getting to know one's own psychology. well enough so that we might have a fighting chance at recognizing when we have become entranced. And of course, we'll fail many times, but even if we're able to be a little bit more awake than we were before, I think that's still a huge win.
Yeah. So in some ways, you have to lay the groundwork, right? Sort of prime ourselves to awaken in the moment. But I can imagine that awakening can happen at any time as well, right? So you got to come at it from a few different angles. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry, my mind is still stuck on the kind of I'm sure someone with the background in linguistics would know the transference, trance. There's some similar kind of even root um, in those words that share that kind of means this. I don't know, like a leaving or departing. My Latin isn't particularly great, but it seems like they share it's pointing towards a common experience, which is um, leaving maybe what is in a certain type of way. I want to what you said. Yeah, it's a lot of the psychological work that's a good way to kind of wake up to it. But even I mean, it's an interesting to talk about. What does that mean to wake up to it? Like, what is when that moment occurs? That often in my experience, I can say that if I feel very hooked by something, let's say if I see the girl in the red dress and it's the teacher, and it brings up all those things, like, and I go into that reaction, and then something takes me out of it. What is that experience? And for me, a lot of the time, let's put it this way, it's not up to my conscious mind in that moment. It's a moment of awareness that kind of shows itself. You can even maybe call it grace in a way that kind of shows.
Did we lose Andrew?
I think so.
Yeah. Andrew, you're back.
I'm back.
Yes, you're back.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I just said the thing that fixed everything, but I lost it now, so I'm sorry to say.
You were
But I was
saying
saying
that
it's very
it's a moment of grace was the last
the
thing you
moment
heard.
of yeah, it's a moment of grace, and I was going on that it's similar to what in mindfulness practice when you're lost in thought, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh my God, what am I doing? I've been thinking about my next meal. I've complete, but like in that moment, something occurs that's not of your own conscious volition, right? Um, but there is a part of the practice of mindfulness is that over time, as you do it, that starts to wake up a little bit more and more and more and more. And so I think that's a way that therapy is helpful in these things, that certain types of spiritual practice that we can talk about might be helpful in this too. And I know Pema Chodron talks a lot about like kind of getting unhooked from what's happening in a kind of given moment. So yeah.
So it sounds like a trance state is fundamental to reality. It sounds like we can often try to think of being in reality as, we've gotten rid of the trance state. Now I'm in reality. And it sounds like you're more saying it's like, no, this is actually, it's fundamental to who we are, right? Because we are individual beings with a unique history. Everything that we relate to is going to be colored by our previous experiences, right? Even our relationship to the unknown. So it sounds like we're going to need to include transference or the trance states in a new way, sort of let it become transparent. So we can
Wow,
see
there we
through
go.
it.
We're hitting all the trans words. Uh, I mean, Tim, when you said that, it was it's a very beautiful, simple statement that I felt myself soften when I heard, which is that trans, this idea of kind of being hooked or, in some sort of unreality state is a fundamental part of reality. Like even just like taking a moment to just let that in. I feel myself exhale when I hear that, because part of the fight starts to relax a bit internally. That actually this is allowed to be here. This lens that colors things maybe in ways that aren't helpful or maybe even destructive a little bit. Doesn't mean you act on it, but that this is fundamental to reality.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, we can't judge ourselves too harshly for falling into trance because we are subjective beings and we'll always have a point of view and we'll always have a personal history um, and there'll always be like, you know, the collective unconscious at play as a force in our lives as well. And yet there are things, you know, we can do, effort that we can put forth to, yeah, again, give ourselves a fighting chance, to include a broader perspective, not just hold on to, I know, the narrow view that we might have in the moment. I know something that's come up for me is, especially when I listen to the news a lot, you know, they might be talking about how bad the economy is and oh, so many thousands of people have been fired and the tech industry and stuff. And it's tempting to just kind of like blindly buy into the narrative. And of course, there is a basis in reality. Like there's a certain, you know, facts of the matter that are around which these narratives are built. But I think one can easily just kind of, I don't want to say fall into despair, but like just kind of like blindly thinks like, well, that's the way things are and nothing else exists. And it's like putting these blinders in front of your face. And you need something to wake up from that.
Yeah. It's such an interesting idea. You know, you're talking very much in that example about kind of an external narrative that might be, you know, given, and we of course have all these internal narratives, you know, and where we kind of I think that they exist is not the issue. It's the way in which we, as you said, we buy into them and kind of make uphold that to be the full truth of the moment, of the world, of existence. And you know, I think back to, you know, the meditation Tim led us in at the beginning, when we're kind of inviting everything in. And I know that as I do that, what starts to become apparent are not only the things that have been invited in, but the sense of maybe space around them, um, and that they kind of exist within this sense of space, and that's this. I think that helps around this idea of when you buy into narrative that it can often seem to take up the entire television screen, the internal television screen, so to speak.
Yes.
Um, but uh, but there's actually by necessity space around it, um, that we can maybe start to touch into, which will soften and maybe enlarge the whole screen.
And I think part of the way I understand stories, it's like stories or narratives, they're sort of held in this trance-like territory because stories are, we take pieces of reality and we kind of make a whole out of it, right? We create a narrative. So now there's this sort of false sense of safety or something, right? So we know, now we're in the known, and that will entrance us, right? So it's like, this is hard work to actually just to stay present. It's hard work, but I keep thinking like, what an awesome gift to give somebody. Because as you guys are talking, I keep thinking about how, you know, I'm lucky enough my grandmother's still alive on my father's side, and every time I go there for dinner, she cooks me cauliflower, because cauliflower was what I liked when I was 5 years old. And she still hasn't woken up from that. No matter how many times I tell her things like that, she's still there. And there's something very sweet about that, right? But I was just thinking, like, I feel like I'm like knocking her, but no, what a gift to give somebody to be present to them in the moment, right? To be awake to different stories that you have to them, but then also to say, okay, like maybe this isn't true, or maybe there's space there that, just to give some room for ambiguity.
Totally. And I think like having someone who can be awake there for you, that's a lot of what, good therapy can be, where you come in with all these beliefs and stories that you're upholding. I'm a bad person, I'm a this, and then the therapist says, actually, and it can maybe wake you up from that. And then over time, I think we can start to do that for ourselves. And notice, oh, I'm back in that story again. And then I think maybe the practical question is, okay, then what? You notice you're in it. You don't want to be in it, but you're still kind of in it. Now what?
That's what like the ego always is asking, right? So now what do I do?
Now what do I
like,
do?
Yeah.
That should be the name. That should have been the name of this lecture. Is now what do I do?
Yeah. Yeah. I woke up to it. So now what? Right.
I go exactly. It's there. I know it's there. It's still there. Is it gone yet? Now what do I like? That's the thing.
I think that's where a lot of people get stuck, honestly, and that's where so much of us need help, because in that moment, it's like we're babies. We've never dealt with this before, but we've done the mature work of awakening to it. So now we can have like a relationship to it, a conscious relationship to it. And so it's like now we have the opportunity to start to wrestle with it, ask questions, relate to ourselves differently. Like, what are the stories that I'm telling about myself? Like, I get angry a lot. And I find myself, after having an engagement with somebody, continually making myself angry. Every time the anger has gone away, I think about it again, and then I get angry again. And I keep myself spinning in this loop over and over again. And I imagine that the moment I can actually say, just feel what's here.
Yeah. Mm.
Instead, like, say, okay, these are all my stories. I get it. But what's actually happening right now is like, oh, I'm angry. Okay. And then usually after like not so long, it goes away. And then there's this part of me that wants to pull it back. And there's reasons for it. It's like, well, if I'm not angry, then how am I going to protect myself from this person? Or if I'm not angry, then how am I going to make sure that I don't get hurt again? Or if I'm not angry, they're not going to listen to me. There's all of this historical BS that's in there.
Yeah.
And I just need to give myself the chance, right? And I guess the cool thing about this topic is this happens everywhere, on like every level. It's such a fundamental thing. Like, anyway.
I think what I'd like to say about this now what moment, because it is almost disorienting, is like, okay, now that I'm awake to this, as you guys said, what now? But I think that moment is actually the moment of freedom, because that's the moment when we can choose a different narrative or realize that there's like, 10 different narratives that I could buy into. I don't have to hold any one of them particularly tightly. I can be more fluid in how I'm perceiving reality, and from there, just have more freedom to choose what it is I want for myself in life.
Yeah, for sure. I just want to go back for a second. That was very helpful, Tim, for that kind of personal sharing. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking, what you're saying, Henrik, about that. Okay, what's next moment? And what strikes me is that okay, now what? That's still coming from the place of really trying to get rid of something. And it goes back to which makes sense. If something's uncomfortable, of course, there's going to be something in you that doesn't want it to be there. That's, I think, very fundamental to reality in a way. Also, that we tend to prefer pleasure and don't like pain. Like that makes sense. But in regard to what you're saying, Tim, about in that now what moment we can start to make a different relationship with it. And I think what that even means on a basic level is we don't have to get rid of it. Like a different relationship, and the idea of having a relationship with it means that we allow it to exist. And then and that's the first thing we have to do. You know, before we can even get curious about it and really try to get to know it, we have to kind of relax enough inside of ourselves to say, hey, you can be here. And then after that, as that starts to kind of settle in, it's, oh, okay, you're here. You want to tell me about yourself a little bit? Um, so allowing something to exist seems to be, and as you're saying, Tim, allowing something to exist and kind of bearing the friction that you feel inside of that discomfort, of that allowing, seems to be a pretty important step um, as we move along.
It's reminding me, I heard a quote from Jason many years ago. I may not be remembering it correctly, but I think you'll get the spirit of it. It is something like, if I can stand consciously in the face of change, that's the way out. If I can stand consciously in the face of change, right? Life is always changing. It's creating anxiety for us. Something happens. I can't tolerate it in my wakeful consciousness. So I go into some story. And then I don't, if say I haven't done enough work, or haven't experienced that grace. So now that I'm in the story, now I go on this whole quest to try to solve this problem or figure it out or understand the meaning of it. So I get more and more lost. And I guess the main thing is what I'm trying to get here is like, we need to first be awake to the judgments that we have about what's allowed and what's not allowed in our life, like right away. Right. So that's what you're saying. That's step one.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's so many of them, aren't there?
Yeah.
Both from our personal history, from the culture, of what's allowed and what's not allowed.
Yeah. And it gives us a chance at having a relationship. That's all I was going to say, Henry.
I'd like to bring in the dimension of how trance plays out in personal relationships with other people. I'm thinking, for example, I manage a team of people, and at times, somebody's maybe not performing quite as well as we are expecting them to. There might be a tendency to start viewing all of their actions through that particular lens. And I don't think that's particularly helpful. And I've been, trying very hard to be awake to that so that I'm not like prejudging the matter. Like, it's like, okay, I've formed this story in my head now of, okay, this person isn't doing well. And so I'll just kind of look for more data points that match that pre-existing narrative and kind of disregard any evidence of the contrary. Essentially, some kind of confirmation bias, right?
Yeah.
I have my hypothesis, and this is just the way life is. And of course, this can happen with a romantic partner. Is like, oh, I'm pissed off because, my wife said blah, 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 and that reminds me of this other time. And I'm not actually seeing her for who she is in this moment.
And
that,
No, go ahead, Tim, please.
Just going to say, that's why awakening to the trance is like the greatest gift that you can give someone. Because you're awake to those lenses, right? The lenses are there, but it's like, okay, now that I'm awake to them, there's enough space where I can include more. And because I'm including more, the stories actually can start to change. Because the stories include. Exactly. So everything starts to change. Yeah. Yeah.
As you're speaking, Henrik, I was kind of feeling those moments where you become awake to what you're doing in those moments of kind of really making someone so much smaller than they are. And I just felt this kind of sadness um, in how we do that and really diminish people. And I think it's, you know, a very universal human experience. Of course, that's what's happening all of the time. But as you were saying, Tim, that's why becoming awake to it is so important. It's yeah, it's very, the vastness of a human being trying to be contained into these tiny stories that we throw onto them. It's not what we ultimately want.
Of course, that's not to say any of this is particularly easy, because you know we all live busy lives, and we're always looking for mental shortcuts. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
that person behaves this way. This is my little summary narrative of this person, and this is how all the pieces of the puzzle fit together. And as a first approximation of reality, it might not be too bad, but it is actually excluding a lot.
But as exactly, and as you're saying, Henry, I think that's exactly it. Like that's what we do, and of course we do it. And becoming awake to us doing that is that's the step. You know, but like when you notice your brain saying that person is that's a clue actually that I'm kind of shutting down the space a little bit.
Yeah.
It's like naming something. It's like the ego has like this job where we need to know in order to operate in this world. So we've got these like biological functions that are doing like what they need to do, but we sort of have to just know ourselves. So it's like, okay, so I have this tendency to want to name something. Once I name something, I've made it something that's workable. Now that it's something workable, now I can feel safe again, and now I can, you know, avoid it or work with it in some way. But I know what to do, and it's like that efforting that we all do, that we have to do, that's required of us to be present, to actually be present in the moment. It's well, it's hard because everything's kind of working against it in a sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. And it seems to me that there's like this alchemical process that we have to go through. It's sort of like we first have to notice that something is going on, like awaken from it, include it in the way that we are including it, inviting everything in, and then sort of wrestle with it, I guess.
Yeah,
And that seems,
and I think as you're saying, Tim, that wrestling, it's actually it's a very body thing that's going on in those moments. You're really feeling these actually, you know, energies that are uncomfortable and maybe a little scary because they involve some sort of sense of change, of unknown, and you tolerate them. I think, you know, we say wrestle, but it's a very thematic thing that's happening, and that's why it's not easy to do.
Yeah, and we have a question. I didn't want to deter it. I just thought you're finished. It's a good time to jump into it. Yeah. So it sounds like this person writes. So it sounds like the meditations we just did, inviting everything in, means we invite our awareness of being in trance. Excuse me. Means we invite our awareness of being in trance in as well. Is that right? In which case, that might mean awakening is not about being without trance, but being awake to it. Is that right? Say yeah. And our trances then unexamined beliefs.
Yes, to all of the beginning parts. Yeah, we definitely want to include those trances and become aware of the trances, be aware of the narratives. And it's not that these narratives magically poof disappear. It's more that we are aware of the fact that, you know, this narrative is just one of many possible narratives. And then again, that's the moment of freedom, the moment where I can say is like, okay, maybe this narrative isn't too helpful to me in this moment. Maybe I'll consider some of the other ones.
Yeah. To the last question, I'm not sure that trances are unexamined beliefs, but it's the act of being kind of stuck in one of them without being aware that that's what's happening.
Yes.
Yeah. Not being aware of being the fundamental thing here,
Yeah.
Yeah, because the narrative or story or whatever you want to call it in itself is not necessarily problematic, right? If you're treating it as a working hypothesis or something lightly held like that, then it's like, okay, let's see where this takes me. But the moment we become unaware and we just kind of start blindly believing it, and that's again all we see, it's that monitor in front of our eyes that we can't break out of, then that's when it's a problem.
Our reactions, right? Being awake to our reactions, just to put it simply.
I also want to bring in it just occurred to me, a kind of a different viewpoint, especially this being, I guess, the foundation of non-duality, which is maybe one of the basic trance, in that we are only separate humans. As another kind of example of it. And just throwing that into the space.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, that's like
answer it.
Yeah.
Go.
I thought you were going to elaborate.
Oh, no. You guys take that one.
Well, yeah, no, I definitely, again, and obviously Jason's work with non-duality is not the only path that talks about, unity and the wholeness of all of life, but certainly within this tradition, becoming awake to the fact that we are not just personal beings, that we are also part of the greater whole. We are the eddy that's part of the greater river. I think is a way of softening our own narrative.
Yeah.
And thus also softening our personal suffering.
Yeah, it's not a separate thing.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tim.
No, it was just, I felt like I started suffering the moment you started imagining that we were just separate, personal beings, separate from the whole. It's like, it started making me think, so belief systems or trances, is that a belief system that we're separate? Is that a trance? I don't know. I think I might want to explore this a little bit more, because belief systems seem to be fundamental as well, right? There has to be some connection to story or narrative. Like a belief systems might be made up of like 5 or 10 stories, is my guess. And it's sort of hold like a larger umbrella.
Yeah.
And we can probably get at that by continuing to do the work that we're talking about. So it's like you be awake to as many stories as you can, and eventually we start to notice that there's this larger umbrella of like, I can't be loved, or I should be, I'm bad, in this
I'm all
shameful
alone.
place. I'm all alone. Exactly. And then it's like, man, once you notice that, now as we can do some good work. Now all of these stories and stuff can start to shift, and your relationship to life can really start to change. So thank you for the comment. We have another comment. This is from Silent Architect. He says, I've noticed I feel like every day is a new day when I break the momentum of a narrative I have forming in my mind. And I often feel like I'm going through my usual routine with fresh eyes. I fall back into a mental narrative and feel the grind from that. And I start to feel down and judge myself for messing up. When I'm in that state, what would be the way to include some self-love to dissolve the disappointment in myself? Thank you so much for this conversation. Did that make sense? Do I need to read it again?
That makes sense. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think the first thing, and it sounds like Silent Architect is already doing some of it, is just noticing that it's happening at all. Because then you have that fighting chance of things like, oh, hold on, I'm doing that thing again where I'm no longer allowing myself to see things with fresh eyes. I'm kind of being mean to myself and telling these negative stories about myself. And yeah, at that moment, I think I would just take, a deep breath and, almost like give myself a hug. And yeah, just like, okay, maybe this isn't true. This isn't quite all of reality. Um,
Yeah. I mean, I would add on that, which is, I mean, there's a very kind of kind, just a kind approach. I think even knowing that you're going to fall back into the narrative is just know that's going to happen. You're going to go in and out 7,000 times a day, and so there might be some sort of expectation that when you're out of it for good. Um, and as nice as that would be, uh, I think knowing that you're just going to go dip back in and dip back out again, and that might allow just a little bit of kindness around that process that's happening. Um, that and that you don't need to necessarily, let's put it this way, the more relaxed around the dipping back in, the kind of the flow of things will just kind of take you back out and then back in again.
Mm. Yeah. So, contractions are going to be inevitable in life, right? And I know when I'm contracted, I can be really hard on myself because I'm having trouble including more. I'm having trouble just finding more pieces that might be true. And I might not have slowed down my life enough, right? There's these super fast judgments that I might make in certain situations. And I think what I would say to Silent Architect is to start to awaken to those judgments and start to see if you can change your relationship to them in the kinder way that you guys are mentioning, right? Because I think it starts there. It starts with the judgments, and then we start to unpack the stories that we're telling ourselves. I'm messing up because I didn't do this perfectly. I didn't do that. And then you start spinning. So,
Yeah, we
once,
start to judge the judgments.
yes. Yeah. Which is that's what I'm getting at. I don't want to judge the judgment. It's perfectly said.
Yeah, so maybe the judgments can just kind of be there and exist without. They're
yes,
okay.
I think I think that's a really important point because even if you're unable to sort of like wake up fully to um, I know these thoughts being unreal at some level. Um, so let's say you still believe the fact that you're a bad person for whatever it is you did. If you can at least love yourself for being this bad person who did whatever, that's already a win. That's already a step forward. That's already a way of being kind towards yourself. Um, and a step towards awakening more. And maybe next time you can sort of more fully dissolve some of these thoughts, unkind thoughts.
That's how non-duality teachings have actually really helped me in the sense that um, everything is interconnected, right? So to live a non-dual life in some ways, just like we did in the beginning, to invite everything in, we have to let everything exist exactly as it is, right? And that's an act of love. right? I don't need to like it. I can still have my preferences, right?
Yeah.
But it's an act of love to let it exist. So where am I going with this? If you're doing that, the contraction's not going to take over as much because you are with whatever's here, and then there's this natural unfolding that can start to take place. And I guess I'm thinking about, it's like, what if somebody says, "I don't love myself"? Well, you're telling me to love myself. Well, I don't love myself, and that's part of what I'm getting at, is that just allowing it to exist, to say, you know what, I've already done violence by judging myself. I'm not going to continue this.
Yeah.
That's love. That's love. And you may not feel it as a warm feeling like you do when you fall in love with somebody or something, but it's still an act of love.
Tim, you kind of took all the words out of my mouth, but much better than I would have said. That was really, really helpful. That just the act of letting something exist, that is a loving act, and there's kindness kind of imbued in that. That is, I think when we say love ourselves, we often think of like kind of mentally telling ourselves, I love you, I love you, you're here, you're welcome, which is great and not a bad thing. But oftentimes that might be coming from a place where we're trying to control something or trying to make something, less disruptive. But the act of actually saying, of giving space for something to be itself, I think that's fundamental kindness.
Yeah.
I was recently speaking to one of my longtime friends, Angelique Tsang, and she's from a slightly different spiritual tradition, but she was talking about some of the releasing techniques that she uses, where it's all around like, I'll say I love you to the fear that I'm feeling. I'll say I love you to any anxiety I'm feeling and stuff, and I think that's very much in the spirit of what we're talking about here. Is like, just love and accept and bring kindness to everything you're touching, everything you're experiencing.
And sorry, I need to add, accept the parts of you that also can't accept something.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the other key. It's not setting up. Now we have to be this being of
Saint.
love and acceptance where everything is welcome. Like it's not realistic. It's if there is a part of you that can't accept something, then we accept that too.
Yes.
And there's a space for that as well.
And we love that part that, can't accept and is an imperfect being, and it's just a human struggling and might have feelings of revenge or resentment or whatever, like, whatever it is. But we need to, in the spirit of the meditation we started at the beginning, welcome all of it in.
And without doing that, we don't really have a shot at transforming ourselves. Right? Otherwise, we're going to just be lost in the stories. We're like the content, right? Like, so psychological work is great because we can work with the stories, we can work with the content, we can work with the histories. But when we work with non-duality, there's this other component that comes in where it's like, well, what about our consciousness? And who do I believe myself to be in relationship to what's now appearing in my life? And you can never get there if you're stuck in that trance. Right? So I just wanted to mention that because I don't think we've said that yet. So got another comment. This is from Gina. She says, I've heard Jason say that one of our main problems is a hidden sense of pride. So usually we think of pride as something overt, like being very prideful. But the silent pride is more difficult to work with. It silently makes us believe we should be better than we are. This is a tricky thing since we do want to improve. But first, we have to be just who we are, imperfect, and accept that. That's when things start to change.
I think that goes back to Andrew's point about accepting you and the person who can't accept, and we don't want to set ourselves up to be cardboard saints. We want to be awakening humans, fallible awakening humans.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all. I mean, that's the situation we're in. If we
Yeah.
if we were born into a world where some human beings were perfect and others weren't, it'd be a different story. But at least so far, that hasn't been the case.
Yeah, it would be strange because there would be less room for kindness, I think, in such a world.
Yeah, and I think actually, as even as we joke about it, that's the way probably a lot of people see the world, or and that's why we're kind of devoid of a lot of kindness.
Yeah, I have to hold myself up to this impossibly high standard, and then I become neurotic and anxious and constantly failing at all of these things.
It's literally crazy making.
Yeah.
And that's why we see so many forms of insanity playing out.
Yeah, and attempts at making ourselves safe within that insanity, but because it's coming from that insane place, again, it just kind of puts even further blinders in front of us, and yeah, no, nothing good can come from that.
Yeah, I mean, imperfect, one of the words. It's also mortal, very fallible, um, limited. I mean, like, no, these are hard things to actually accept about ourselves in many ways.
Yeah,
And I'm thinking about what we said earlier about how we get to this point where we're awake to what's here, right? So I can say first we have to be just who we are, imperfect, and accept that. So it's like, okay, I'm accepting that. I'm even accepting the parts of myself that don't accept that, right? So I'm doing it. I'm in relationship to everything. Now what?
Now what?
Now what? You know, so I feel like in that moment there's probably a whole host of news stories that pop up, like you should have figured this out by now, like there should be a way to anyway. So I don't think this ever ends, and so I think it's a good conversation to
Wait,
have because
what?
yeah. Yeah, should have known that was
I'm
coming.
out.
But,
I'm done.
so okay, we got another comment. Angelique says, tried wrestling and judging or fixing these parts for years and it didn't work. Love and acceptance seem to be more powerful in creating a new dynamic with what I want to control.
Yeah.
control in quotation marks.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think that wrestling and judging and fixing is a very necessary part of the process. That obviously, like, we don't want to get stuck there because it kind of tends to get circular. But I do think it's something that we all have to try and fail at enough times to realize, oh, maybe there's a different way.
Yeah,
And maybe over time, as we can help people do it less and less.
I do want to give some hope to people here because I do think that as we become more practiced at this, I think it becomes easier and easier to recognize these moments of like, oh, I'm doing that thing again where I'm buying into this thing, and I can go straight towards that kindness, towards that love, towards that acceptance, and help myself snap out of that place.
And look, maybe we can, because this conversation could go on for a long time. Maybe we can weave this into future roundtables in different ways. Because I'm even thinking, like, what about our ideas of what life should look like, and our ideas of what love should be, or what acceptance looks like. So we always have this sort of give and take with reality, and it totally depends on how we hold it. But thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for listening to us. And the Foundation for Non-Duality is eternally grateful for your presence. And we live and die by your donations. We thrive with your donations. So if you could, please offer what you can. And we will see you, as always, in the second Friday of next month. That's when we're going to do this, the second Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern. So we'll see you then.
Bye.
bless the years as they roll on by, and the days are a sign of what you're thinking. We want eternity, and you give us time, and our own lives seem to pass